welcome to another series of The Law and You. Today we are going to begin a series of discussions on the Constitution. And during this series of discussions, we will be discussing a number of subject areas touching and concerning the Constitution of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. We will begin by looking at the supremacy of the Constitution. After the supremacy of the Constitution, we will deal with this whole notion of the separations of power. After the separations of power, we will be looking at the rule of law. After the rule of law, we will be looking at the legislator. After the legislator, we will be looking at the whole makeup or the provisions under the Constitution that deal with statutory bodies. Now, it is important for us, and we want to take our time basically in trying to give or deliver these discussions in very simple language, so that you will be able to comprehend what it's all about. Now, the Constitution, as we would recognize, we have the Constitution of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. And many of you know that that book, that document can be uplifted or can be purchased from the National Parliament. And of course, it is available online. It is available in libraries to read. But that document is very important because, as one might have contended many years ago, and we still raise that contention now, that it is really an important document because it is the foundation of the many laws in which we have in the country. But let's ask ourselves this very important question: what is the Constitution? Now, in looking at various explanations of the Constitution, I want to put out there is no one definition of what the Constitution is. And so in an attempt to explain what the Constitution is, you might find that I might refer to a number of writings, including the Fundamental of the Constitution, which was written by, and I believe, our very own sitting president of the Caribbean Court of Justice, Justice Saunders, along with Dr. Bulkan and another. I found that book brings a very interesting reading, and I know that it helps, like in many of the other research academic materials. It does help to bring some form of context to understanding what the Constitution is. But the Constitution, if we were to put it into very simple language, the Constitution means a document. It means a document having special sanctity, which sets out the framework and the principal functions of the organs of government within the state. It is the same Constitution which declares that the principles, that it is the principle or sets out the principle by which the organs of the state is to operate. I came across two very important words, and it has stuck in my mind, and I can't seem to get the words out of my mind for many years. And the two words that I wish to invite you to consider whenever you're going to determine what the Constitution is the word restraint and protection. Restraint and protection. So one would say that the Constitution restrains the members of the state or organs of the state it restrains them from doing what they want, and it protects the citizens from the state organs violating their rights. Now, as we go further, we would recognize that when we look at this whole issue of the Constitution, we find that there is an establishment of relationship. That relationship is between the state and its people. All right? So the Constitution, of course, defines what the relationship will be and how the relationship ought to function between the state and its people. Now, importantly, I want us to consider that in the broadest sense, a constitution, and this is of course strictly the learning coming out of the book, The Fundamentals of Constitutional Law, in which one of the co-authors is the president of the Caribbean Court of Justice, Justice Saunders. And the book, the writings of those authors give this meaning that the Constitution provides for the establishment of the principal institutions of government and the allocation of power between them. I'll go that again. The Constitution is the establishment of the principal institutions of government, and it allocates and the allocation of the power between them. The Constitution provides a snapshot picture of how these institutions may exercise their power. So immediately you must consider that the Constitution mandates or sets out very clearly how governmental powers must be exercised. If governmental powers act outside of the Constitution, I will tell you how the law treats with that. But really and truly, the Constitution sets the parameters, or it sets the boundaries in which those powers ought to be exercised by governmental organs. Now, of course, the Constitution, of course, lays out the duties of those governmental organs. And of course, it allows citizens to enforce their rights and protection under the law. Now, we would understand that the Constitution, like in Guyana, the Constitution, which is, and I have my Constitution right here, the Constitution, one of the most important first article that you ought to look at when you look at the Constitution of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana is Article 8. Now, this is what Article 8 says. It's in its actual form. Now, Article 8 and the subheading of that article is the supremacy of the Constitution. Now, this, I want you to hold this word very carefully. Supremacy of the Constitution. Because during the duration of our discussions on the supremacy of the Constitution, you will find that this word will be reoccurring. Supremacy of the Constitution. Now, the Constitution, and I'm reading from our Constitution here, and I read, the Constitution is supreme law. It is the supreme law of Guyana, and if there is any law, if any other law is inconsistent with it, that other law shall, to the extent of its inconsistency, be void. Let me explain what that is saying in very clearer language to you. There is no law in this country, Guyana, which is superior to the law of the Constitution or the Constitution. The Constitution is the highest law of this land. Now, if there is any law which is enacted through Parliament in this country that comes into conflict with the Constitution, then that law is going to be considered or deemed void by a court of law to the extent to which it comes into conflict with the Constitution. And that is how important the Constitution is, because the Constitution, of course, leads and it breeds and it sets the parameters by which every law which is enacted must come, because they must all come in conformity with the Constitution. How we want to get now and to talk for a very short while on the functions of this Constitution. One, we understand that the Constitution in this country is the supreme law. So if there is any violation of the supreme law by anyone, any organ, any government, any state organ, then of course you know how the court is going to consider. The courts in many of the commentary around the Caribbean, Guyana is no different. The court is observed as the guardian of the Constitution, which means the court must ensure that there is always compliance with the Constitution. If any person violates the Constitution, it is not magical as to what the courts is going to rule. The court must rule, and its ruling must be in keeping with what the Constitution is. Now, let's look at the functions of the Constitution. I find that when we look at the functions of the Constitution, we have Justice Saunders as an author, as well as Dr. Bulkan, who now sits as justice in the country of Belize, in the Court of Appeal, very skillfully looked at the functions of the Constitution, in which they have incorporated these functions as functions which are applicable to Guyana. The first function that they of course reasoned that the Constitution establishes the institutions of government. Then clearly it is the Constitution, every institution or every government ministry or every government organ is, of course, the Constitution has established, the establishment of it, the Constitution dictates how it is to be established. Of course, in determining, of course, how it's to be functioned, we always ought to think that the Constitution, because it's the right thinking, that the Constitution, since its inception, was created so that there be what we call good governance, and so that there might be a promotion of what is called democracy. Now, in many of the other territories, in many of the other countries, and I might suggest that one of them is Jamaica, which there is this whole contention as to whether the Constitution is supreme. That is because of the fact supremacy on power really is divested in the Queen, as in many of the outside territories like Turks and Caicos Islands and so on. Guyana is very distinct in that Guyana does not have that type of system. So the supremacy of the Constitution, I will tell you just at the end of this first discussion, where the sovereign power lies. Now, the sovereign power, so the first function that we saw is that the Constitution establishes the institution of government. The second function of the Constitution is that it clarifies where sovereignty lies. Whenever we talk about sovereignty and whenever we talk any constitutional student or any constitutional lawyer, whenever that person talks about sovereignty, that person cannot divorce this whole concept of power. So really and truly, when we talk about this function of the Constitution, that the Constitution clarifies where sovereignty lies, is that the Constitution clarifies for us in very clear language that the power lies in the people. You, as citizens of this country, you are the ones that have the sovereign power. You have the sovereign power because of the fact, of course, every 5 years you'll recognize there is either you have the power to either elect a ruler, of course, a government, a particular political party who is going to govern the country, or you're going to take out one. That exercise of power is not a light power. That is a fundamental function that is given to you by the Constitution. And that is because the sovereign power lies in you. The third functions of the Constitution. The third function of the Constitution is that the Constitution balances rights of persons and interests of the majority. What it does, of course, it gives, you will find, and as we go further in this discussion, you will see that there are fundamental rights which are protected by the Constitution. All right? So you will find that that is also a part of what the Constitution allows us to have and enjoy. It really, of course, articulates, which is another function, it articulates the core values and commitments. And of course, you will find that it identifies the territory for which we belong. Of course, it has, of course, the outline of which are the demarcations and the, of course, and the boundaries of which the Constitution will have power over. Of course, what defines Guyana, what are our boundaries, and what are our demarcations, all of that you will find in the Constitution. But importantly, as we begin this journey through the Constitution, the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, we want to begin by telling you clearly, if there is anything that you want to remember from this discussion, we would want you to remember that the Constitution is the supreme law. There is no other law in Guyana which is going to be considered higher than the law of the Constitution of Guyana. So that the courts must, as guardian of the Constitution, the courts must, of course, uphold constitutional provisions. I thank you until the next time.